So I'd like to welcome our listeners to QG Connect. So this is an interview series, as you've probably already heard about, where we interview industry leaders about their perspectives around data governance. And I'm really excited to welcome our guest today. So I have with me Peter Aiken, who is the president at DAMA. So welcome to QG Connect, Peter.
Thank you, Barath. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really looking forward to our conversation today. Talking about your background a little bit, Peter. I know you're a man of many talents, but maybe we can start by talking about what your professional journey has been so far. So would you mind maybe starting there?
Not at all. I'm sitting at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is in Richmond, Virginia. I am tenured at Virginia Commonwealth, so my allegiance is to them, and they own every thought in my head, which is kind of an interesting proposition. That's a separate conversation we can have with you listeners at some point in the future on that. But I never, I think, would have thought to become a professor. It's always interesting how you get to these places. And I was a student here at Virginia Commonwealth University in 1977. And at 18, of course, you think you know everything in the world and don't need any guidance. And I went to my guidance counselor here at the university and said, you know, I'm thinking of becoming a lawyer because I think that's kind of an interesting profession. And I think I can, you know, understand the logic that's involved in being a lawyer and all of that sort of thing. And my advisor patted me on the head very correctly and said, little boy, let me do some math with you. And at that point in time, 1977 in the United States, there were 2 million lawyers and there were 200 million Americans. So that's one lawyer for every 100 Americans. And that was probably a bad number at that point in time. And she said, you know, given that you have some talents already in the computer area, I would suggest that you would be better applied putting your talents into computers, because there are only about 200,000 people in the entire world in 1977 that have a good working knowledge of computers, and you're already one of them in there. And I've ever been grateful for that advice, in fact, to the point where I've endowed the university with a gift that'll go on after I'm gone around that particular process. So, you know, you're an undergraduate, you're taking classes. Now I'm in the IT program, I'm learning about things. And of course, what happens pretty clearly is that eventually you get tied into the university structure. So I was hired by the university rather quickly after I started working, I started taking classes. So we move on a little bit further, and I'm working full-time for the university, really enjoying my help desk function and doing projects for the university as a full-time job in the process. Excuse me. But the one thing that the university gives you as a benefit is free classes. So, okay, I'll take some more classes and go for a master's degree. Kind of nice. Now, at this point, I've worked my way up to about the number 3 person in the VCU Computer Center, big old mainframe. We're talking CICS, VTAM. These names probably won't mean anything to your audience because they don't tend to be data governance challenges, but they were the data governance challenges that we had in our day to do this. My master's thesis advisor, when we finished the program, turned around to me and said to me, Peter, you're having too much fun. So I'm going to throw a wrench into your fun. Okay, Dr. Sutherland, what is it that you're going to do? I said, well, I've enrolled you in a PhD program up at George Mason University. Okay, so I started looking around, decided that he had made a very good choice and participated in that program. I finished there, worked at the university up at in Fairfax, Virginia for a couple of years, and then was recruited by the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense had some data projects that they wanted to work on, so they hired a bunch of us to get together. We were a team, and we worked on some very interesting projects. In fact, one of the first ones that was really sort of emblematic of what we were doing was that DoD, the year I joined, had 37 systems that paid people. They needed, of course, to have one, but getting rid of 36 systems is a political problem. It's not a technology problem. And this was a tremendous lesson to me, because certainly while we could do the integration that we needed to do to get all the data together, the problem was I had 36 other systems and people all the way up to their senators and Congress people who were saying, why aren't you going to pick the system in New Orleans? And you had to have a good objective reason for that. Anyway, spent some time working on that. The upshot of it was that the Defense Department at the end of that engagement ordered me to write a book. Can you order somebody to write a book? And my boss wisely said, do you want to ask that question twice? I said, yes, I will go write the book.
Yes.
I think I have a copy of it. Well, not here, but anyway, the book had a tremendously exciting title. If any of you have trouble sleeping at night, please just email me and I will send you this book. It is guaranteed to work without the harmful side effects of Ambien. But it will tell you a little bit about reverse engineering as well. So I ended up back at the university here, not through any particular plan, but I've been on the faculty here since 1993. So next year will be my 30th year. At the university here, interestingly enough, I got a call one day. It wasn't this office, we had a different building, but I pick up the phone and it's the managing director for Deutsche Bank. What on earth is the managing director of Deutsche Bank calling me for? But of course, I'm very interested in talking. And he said, "You've written a book that I think we need your expertise up here for." And I'd only written one book. And I said, "Do you have a data problem?" And he said, "Oh, you're talking exact." So he had a problem where he had systems. He had hired a consultant to come in and fix them, and they had messed it up even worse. And it turned out that what they hadn't done was followed what we had put in the book as guidance. So from that sort of start, we have a very strong tradition here at Virginia Commonwealth University of what we call experiential learning. That is the case that everybody learns by watching, by doing, and by reading. Well, if you do, it tends to reinforce the other two. And so most of the courses that I've been fortunate enough to teach have the students literally rolling up their shirt sleeves and working on problems. And that's so satisfying to do because it gives them very good expertise. Now, we're talking data governance in general because that's, of course, the focus of your interview series. But we don't have any courses in data governance in colleges and universities. There are a couple that have some. But literally just before this interview, I was downstairs working with another class of MBAs and teaching them things about data. And where were they going to get it if they didn't happen to have a course taught by somebody who cares a little bit about data in here? So I also own 2 companies with the university. As I mentioned before, they own everything that's between the two here. And one of the things the university wants us to do is to commercialize this property. So the companies that I have are dedicated to focusing on these issues and helping organizations do this. And this has maybe made me a different sort of professor because instead of always sitting in the office and working, I've instead done 8 immersions, and that means I go and live with a company. So the Deutsche Bank was the first one. I spent 5 years with them. I spent 4 years with Nokia in Finland. Didn't spend the entire time, of course, in Finland, but working with the companies on and off and spending a lot of time over there, learning how other companies work. Walmart, Wells Fargo, and I'm working with the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level right now. So that's my 8th immersion. Those give you the ability to really see what the problems are from the work level. And when you look at what's happening at the work level, things are generally not getting better. I'm doing this because I'm imitating the waters coming up and getting to the point where we're drowning because there's so much data that's going on and we aren't getting better about the process of managing data. And if we're not getting better about it and it's increasing, there are 2 outcomes that are absolutely certain. One is that the process that we call surveillance capitalism will win. That is the idea that we can influence individuals' behaviors by sending them the right kinds of messages. In its best form, this is considered advertising. In its worst form, it's considered population control. And if you want to look at something like that, there's a great book out there by the guy that was in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Chris Wiley just wrote a beautiful book on it. I can't even say the word on the podcast, the name of the title, but you can look it up there. Chris Wiley is a great piece. We need to understand more about this, and we're not getting it to them in education. So that's sort of become my cause is to try and further the cause of what's happening out there in the world so that people will be smarter about this wonderful resource we have, the data, and that we can start to teach courses in data governance, that we can start to train data leaders, that we can not have them come out and graduate and then find out, because that's how you encounter people.
I was going to say, really love the background you shared, Peter, because I feel like coming from that academic background, you have sort of clearly sort of been through that process, but the challenge still stands because today, like you pointed out, there are no sort of courses that specialize in that area. And based on what you've shared, you sort of built up that sort of muscle around data governance and being sort of steeped in this data arena organically, but there needs to be structurally, operationally, those courses that really convey the value of data governance and data
You and
management.
I can't do it by ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just two of
Exactly.
us, we're not
That's
going
right.
to make. So
That's right.
absolutely, we'll think about this for just a minute. In the traditional IT education, students receive one class in data, and that is how to build a new database.
Mhm.
Now, if there's one skill we do not need any more of on planet Earth, period,
That's
end of
right.
story, it is how to build more databases. And of course, the problem that you and I face in our day-to-day jobs is that there are too many databases.
Mhm.
Why are we surprised? We've taught students for the last 30 years that the solution, data solution to everything is go build another database.
Yeah,
And then we're surprised that they made a mess while they were doing it.
that's right. Yeah, completely. I mean, I'd love to understand your perspective. I mean, talking about all of these challenges, like you said, and yeah, to your point, there's still work to be done here. I was wondering if you could sort of shed some light on how all of your experiences in academia, how does maybe that some of that tie into the work that you do at DAMA? And for those of our listeners who are maybe not super familiar with what DAMA does, I was wondering if you could maybe start there.
Sure. I was fortunate to be elected president of DAMA last year. DAMA is the professional organization for data managers. And our observation is that except for exceptional individuals like yourself who get data and really go do it, we actually are starting a new phrase. We're saying we're putting our data ears on. Now, nobody knows what that means, but at least they get the idea that there's a perspective that we need to take. And so when you look at what's happening out there, again, you're encountering people for the first time, we're encountering people for the first time. We did some studies of this in DAMA and found out that the IT profession, about 10 years into it, sometimes it takes 15 years into it, somebody will start to go, gosh, you know, if they did the data better, this would have been easier. We achieve results, you know, that's not the question. We are making progress as a society, but it would be faster, better, and cheaper if we paid more attention to the data early on. And then somebody in their organization says, well, Bharath, you said data 3 times. Congratulations, you're the new data person. So we appoint you the data leader for the organization, and you start looking around and going, okay, if I'm going to be the data leader, where can I go for resources? And the answer is the DMBOK. The DMBOK is the data management body of knowledge. DMBOK is the now the de facto standard for what is happening out there. And it's really the first exposure most people get to data governance as a part of everything else that goes on in the data world. So before the DMBOK, we did not have a good guide to it. There were a couple of collections and handbooks and writings and things. We had a lot of luminaries in the field, people like John Zachman, Clive Finkelstein, who taught me a lot in the process. But it still hasn't filtered its way down. And so the data management professional organization is where most people go when they find data and they want to learn more about resources. I'll give you an example that I'm working with just at the moment. We have a tremendous number. Well, we have 50 departments of transportation for each state, right? The Hawaii department, the Minnesota department. And guess what? They're all having to learn about data governance on their own. That doesn't seem to be a very useful way of doing this.
That's right.
And my push personally is to try and make technology and make processes available so that these organizations don't have to do it by themselves, that all 50 of our departments of transportation, and in fact, all 50 of our state governments and federal governments can learn more about data faster and then be able to serve whatever their mission is faster, better, and cheaper in that process. So DAMA has been around as an organization for many, many years. It started out as more of a club, quite frankly, and that's not a disparaging term for it. That's just the way it was. People got together, they enjoyed it, and were doing things. DAMA has now grown to where we have a very large budget and thousands of members that we need to have working on this. Plus, everybody's expecting now a third version, a next refinement of this data management body of knowledge. So these are tasks that I'm organizing and helping to put resources to. And at the moment, we do have resources, so we're actually optimistic that we'll be able to get some very good traction very soon.
No, thanks, Peter. And I can imagine, I mean, balancing your role at VCU, your role at DAMA, that's no easy task. So full credit to you for sort of wearing these multiple hats. But I was wondering, I mean, maybe just to touch upon the point you brought up, what is a typical sort of day in the life of a president at DAMA like? Because I tactical things you're focused on, some strategic things looking further out. So I was wondering if you could maybe share some details there.
Well, now, do you want to before COVID or after COVID? Because of course nowadays,
That's probably, yeah, that's a whole different conversation in itself. But maybe currently, like within the last year, let's say.
yeah. So good progress, and the masks are coming off. In fact, our mask mandate ends on March 21st, which is 2 days from now, but can't do it yet.
Glad to hear that.
But in terms of the day, yeah, so DAMA, first of all, is an all-volunteer organization. We have some paid staff, but the people who do most of the work are volunteers. They're very dedicated as well. Many of them have been friends for many years, so it's a very nice group of people. That said, we're all getting older, and I will ask your audience at this point, if they are interested in learning more about these opportunities, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, because we want to get more people involved. We need it. We have lots of things to do. I'm very easy to find. If you Google Peter Aiken, I'm the first one that pops up on the internet around that. So in terms of the day, I have different parts of the business that are running. By the way, when I call it a business, it is a business, but it's a non-for-profit business, which is not the same thing as a nonprofit, but that'll get us into some finer distinctions. So in terms of initiatives, we have our certification, which is the Certified Data Management Professional, and we have groups of people that are working on different exams. If you want, we have a specialty exam in data governance. We have a specialty exam in data architecture that we're developing. These are things that we're trying to get businesses to now say in their hiring recs, I would prefer to have a data governance professional who has a CDMP, that certification in this, because that gives me an idea that they have at least this much knowledge, as opposed to randomly where we might not have any knowledge in there at all. And hopefully that everybody's generally agreeing that the material that is in the DMBOK, while it's certainly not perfect, is generally in the right direction. And that's a huge step that we've been able to take. So I'm working on making sure the CDMP is working. We have always the problem of marketing and communication. And we want to make sure that we have good communication with our members. Right now, the website is the main form. We're working on getting our technology up and running so that we can start to do email and also reach out with sort of Insta polls and things like that for the members to keep them more engaged in the process. We have policies and procedures that we need to work on. We get asked by the government on a fairly regular basis to comment on certain initiatives that they're doing. And so we may have some white papers that we're putting together. A fair number of different types of activities. We may have a chapter that's getting started that needs some help, or we may have a chapter that has actually been around for a while and it's not. Again, one of my meetings today, it's embarrassing to say that as president of DAMA, my local Central Virginia chapter actually collapsed a couple of years ago. With the pandemic and everything, we hadn't had a chance to get started, but literally 2 hours ago, we did a kickoff meeting. So we're very excited about that particular process. So I'm certainly never bored, and I never have the same day twice. There's always something new coming along. I'll say one other thing that is just wonderful. As I mentioned before, my colleagues that I work with around the world have things to offer as well. And that's the best part of all of this, is that we interact with a very high quality group that we can learn from. So we may be working on an exercise in Chicago around the Chicago chapter and doing some things there. And in doing that, we may encounter some new features, some new aspects of data management that we haven't had a chance to get into. Or we may discover, as we've done several times, people who have gamified the process of doing data governance. That's certainly a big trend in today's era. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the idea of, yes, I do this and I've created these things is very nice, but if we put you in competition with everybody else, it becomes more of a game and people start to become much more engaged. Because generally, if you want to turn off people at a party, walk over to them and say, let's talk about data. So, yeah, I think so. We'll go somewhere else.
Maybe after a couple of drinks.
There you go.
No, I mean, that's really intriguing, Peter, because one of the things I was actually going to ask you was going back to some of those frameworks and some of those methodologies you mentioned. I mean, are there trends that you see across industries where there's one, let's say, framework being applied across maybe a company in FinServ versus a company in media? Is it more of like that kind of a thing where a one size fits all, or does the framework, the methodology, the process depend on which stage of the maturity level that organization is on as far as the data governance and data management in general?
Well, of course, Barath, you've been in this business for a while, so you know it is related to the maturity of the organization. The biggest challenge that most organizations have is that, let's say they want a glossary or a metadata repository or something like that. Their knowledge of those topics is here.
Right.
The vendor's knowledge is here. And there's not a good conversation that occurs. So one of the things we're trying to do very hard at DAMA is allow people to become more expert in these areas very quickly. Again, this group that you have together, that really we've just been encountering each other for the past couple of months, but we're super excited about the possibility, and we're looking at some very good partnership things in here. I'd love to be able to say to my members, you know, here's a great place to go and do a rotation through, or have your speakers come into a chapter and give talks. All of these kinds of things are very important. But I think the challenge really is that outside of we who like data, there's just not a sense that this stuff is important. And so this gets me to the most recent book, which is the book on data literacy. Most people who are talking about data literacy are arguing about whether you or I should have 5 courses in statistics or 10 courses in statistics. And while that is a good and important discussion, it's not going to move the needle, because there are 2.5 billion people out there who have mobile devices that are connected to the internet. And that means they have supercomputers that are connected to the internet. And those supercomputers can be damaging, or they can be used for good. And if they don't know what they're doing out there, we classify them as mobile data spreaders. They have a mobile device and they're walking around and they're spewing data.
That's right.
Most people have no idea when they say, "Can I get your location?" And they say yes. That means that some organizations that we've tracked take a picture of their location 14,000 times a day.
Oh, wow.
That seems a little creepy, doesn't it?
It does.
If I said I was going to look at your location 4 times a day, I would get a different picture of what you do. But I'm not sure most people realize when they say, sure, no problem. And let's get to a practical side too. You wonder why your battery's phone's going down? It's because your phone is spying on you and sending that data to somebody else at your expense.
That's right.
Not only can't you make a phone call, but you're paying for the service for them to do it. It is that's a terrible situation. And that's one of the major focuses of data governance, is raising this awareness among the population, not just in our worker population of knowledge workers, but our entire civilization. Imagine if we could take entire countries and make it illegal to give anybody their data unless they had something else. Now, Europe thinks they've done that. They're getting closer. It's a step in the right direction, but they certainly have not cut off or defeated surveillance capitalism. They have a long way to go before they get to that stage.
No, first of all, just to echo what you had mentioned, Peter, one of the reasons DataQG was started was to basically touch upon the point you had brought up, which is around building the awareness of data governance. Because while organizations like DAMA have been embarked on that whole journey and that process the last decade or so, I think we're trying to really sort of augment the work that DAMA is doing. And I think, like you said, we complement each other in a lot of ways. So just to echo your point, we're really excited to work with you on it. And
we can't do it by ourselves. We need partners like
correct, exactly. So I think it's all about partnerships, collaborations. How can we collectively raise the profile of data governance? Because I feel like, and I think you probably agree with this, it doesn't get as much spotlight as AI or analytics or any of these BI initiatives that a lot of organizations sort of embark on. And I mean, to that point, Peter, I'd love to get your perspective on what sort of resources or methodologies or collateral are organizations looking for in order for them to build up that data literacy, those data maturity levels? I mean, what are some of the trends you've been seeing?
Well, I think the DMBOK is actually providing quite a bit of guidance around that. Now, the DMBOK is not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it tells you what needs to be done. Each organization is going to come up with it on their own. In fact, one of the things we use to describe data governance is that it really is a bespoke type of an operation. A bespoke is a word when somebody makes a suit that only Peter fits into or only Bharat fits into. It's absolutely perfect for you, and it's probably not going to work well for anybody else. That doesn't mean there aren't lessons to be shared about the 50 departments of transportation that all need to learn about data governance. But each one of them is going to implement data governance in a slightly different fashion. And having that ability to customize it requires both knowledge of the business as well as knowledge of what the organization is trying to do. And IT over the years has not done a lot in those areas to focus on it. Basically, their attitude has been, can they connect to the server? Cool, we're done. We'll let the business people figure it out. The business people look around and see somebody with the title Chief Information Officer and assume that individual is taking care of it. So it's fallen into a gigantic gap here between the business and IT. And people, back to what we talked about before, just don't even know that data governance means something. So you talk about the various frameworks and things that are out there. There are, I think at the moment, we've got about 10 or so general data governance frameworks. Quite well known. If people have trouble seeing them, by all means, ping somebody. I'm sure you guys have a copy of them as well. But what we do is we show them 10 different ways and we say, what do you like about these? It's kind of like this suit. You like this suit? Now, how about this suit? You like? Try them on, and there will be aspects of them that they can then learn how to assemble something that will work well for their organization. The other thing that goes on, and again, it's a sort of a framework issue, as you mentioned, is that many people think just because somebody else did it, they should do it. You should have your data governance driven by what your business needs are. If your business needs are focusing on the customer, then let some of the other stuff wait to phase 2 or phase 3 before you implement the thing. But if your focus is customer facing, then let's make sure that we have governance that ensures that nobody will be facing badly designed systems or good systems filled with bad data. One of the ways I illustrate this with management is that even during the pandemic year, I have now a list of 12 companies that have installed Salesforce and then decided to clean up the data. Well, Salesforce is good software, right?
Right.
But the customer can't tell. There's somebody looking at Salesforce says, I'm trying to find Peter's email address. And so they're looking for it. And if my name is spelled incorrectly in Salesforce, they're going to say Salesforce is not correct. It's not the case that the Salesforce is not correct. Salesforce is doing what it's supposed to do. But if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. And management not realizing that, in hindsight, in all 12 of those cases, said, oh my goodness, we should have done the data cleansing way before we turned it on, because now people think Salesforce is a bad piece of software. It's not. It's a good piece of software filled many times with less than optimal quality data. So the methods are useful, and we put as much, I think, of the bones of the methods out there as we can. But at the same time, it really does depend on the expertise. And I'm sure you find this in your own practice, Bharath. When you walk into a company, you can say, I was looking at another company and what they did over there is not going to work here. But I can see what will work here because you guys are working with, for example, larger cultural issues or dated technology, or maybe the amount of rot in the data is very large. Rot stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And our measurements, by the way, show that minimally 80% of the data in all organizations is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. So they're managing 4 times as much data as they should be. Well, that's a great place to start working on data governance. But if you've got a regulatory deadline coming up, fix the regulatory thing first.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I really love that. If I can paraphrase, I think what you had said, I mean, starting with what the outcomes for your data governance program needs to be, that probably needs to be a starting point. And then backing up into, okay, what does that translate to in terms of data quality, tooling, and I think then sort of arriving at, okay, which framework makes sense. In my case, I think that's the optimal flow that I heard you sort of articulate. That sort of resonates with me a lot, because that's something that we've been hearing from these other leaders who are trying to get these programs off of the ground, or who have already sort of embarked on their journey. And I think that's what I heard you say as well, Peter.
Yeah, again, the idea that you can simply transplant somebody else's program to yours, probably not going to work.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the priorities are different, the technology is different, and the people are different.
Yeah.
And if we don't get those things level set, then we're going to have a mismatch.
Completely. No.
I have a friend who once went to an organization and worked on the data quality challenge for a couple of years, and came back and said, okay, so I fixed 3 data elements in 3 years. They are perfect. And they went, do you realize we have 5,000 data elements? I don't think we can afford to employ you any longer. It's too long, too slow, and it's not producing results fast enough. And again, you have to have that perspective. Okay, so then the obvious thing is, where should I have started? Well, before you started with the A's, you probably should have talked to some of the business people and said, what are your business problems that you're trying
Exactly.
to solve? If I can make another point, Bharat, many people are really looking for machine learning and artificial intelligence to add some value to this, and they don't realize that we are absolutely stuck. So what's happened is we've discovered, and again, I am literally around the corner from the computer science department. So if I went out that door and down the hallway, I would be in the computer science department at Virginia Commonwealth University. And these guys are great. I don't say anything bad about them, but they will often come and sit in my doorway and say, hey, Peter, do you have any data that looks like this? And I'll say, well, why are you doing that? They'll go, because I got this great algorithm for processing that data. But of course, we can see this is completely backwards. Correct. There's no business out there that's saying, I'm going to do a data problem so that your algorithm can fix it. The solution is, as you described, what is the organizational challenge and how can we design people, process, and technology in order to address that particular problem? But most of the colleagues around the corner here haven't been out of this building in 30 years. And so they're very happy teaching their classes and doing these things, but they don't know what's going on in the real world, and that's a problem. And when the students get out, the first thing they have is this great awakening to the world is a little different than the way it looked like in college and university.
No, I mean, that's why I think your background that you had shared, Peter, where you come from that academic background, but you've seen how organizations are actually implementing these practices in the real world. I think that's sort of a unique perspective that I think you bring. And I'd like to say I really sort of enjoyed our conversation today. And before we drop, Peter, I know you have a book that you referenced. And for people who are looking to sort of reach out to you, what would be the best way they can reach out?
Well, the easy way is my website is anythingawesome.com, and there's an automatic link there that you can just click and I'll have an appointment with you. So that part's really easy, or just Google me on Google. But Bharat, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this, and for, more importantly, helping us get the word out about data. One of the fun things about this is that there's really very little competition. There's no zero-sum games here. The pie is so big and the task is so vast. Even you and I couldn't solve it together, but if we can get a couple more, we might be able to make a dent in the universe.
I think I couldn't have said it better myself, Peter. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for taking the time today. Again, really enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm sure we'll have a follow-up conversation, because I feel like we just started to sort of scratch the surface. There's a lot of different areas, maybe one around like people, process, technology, which I'd love to follow up with you on. So maybe that's a conversation for another day.
And I will look you up when I get to Austin next.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Peter.
Have a great day.